So as Nicole said, I'm first and foremost a research analyst. I do tons and tons of research on content marketing and content strategy and how this whole content thing fits into the entire media mix and marketing mix. And what I'm going to share with you today is something that I don't often share. Usually when I present at conferences, I present my finished and published research. And what I want to share with you today is research in progress. This is a report that I've been working on for the last year or so on global content marketing and its challenges. And it will publish soon, but it's not out yet. But by means of introduction, what I'm always researching, aside from my actual research, is the subjects that the industry needs researched. In other words, I'm trying to identify the pain points that marketers and the industry and my clients and technology vendors are facing, and then try and address them with pragmatic analysis and recommendations. So this is work in progress. And what I'm finding, particularly from some of the clients I'm working with now, including a global nonprofit organization, a large manufacturer of dental instruments, a major global technology company, so these are three very, very diverse industries. They're all coming to me and saying, how do we do this globally? We're getting our hands around it on a national basis, but we've got Europe, we've got Asia, we've got Latin America. How do we get everybody on the same page, get this coordinated, and get this going in a scalable way that doesn't drive everybody crazy? So I'm going to start out by talking about some of the goals and some of the challenges of global content marketing. And global content strategy is a little bit different than a national strategy or a strategy in a contained national environment, because it involves so much evangelization. Content's importance, its role in the business, its significance needs to be evangelized worldwide. You can't just push things out into the world and expect people to pick up the ball and run with it if there isn't some comprehension and some enthusiasm about content's importance. And you also need to share content and make it accessible to all your global teams. So it needs to flow upstream and downstream, not just out from headquarters, which is the view of way too many companies. And by the way, my background is as a global marketer. So before I was an analyst, I was bringing brands across borders and across territories. So it's got to flow out from headquarters across countries and regions, but then it has to come back into the mothership, so to speak, to inform new phases of content and new initiatives. David Beebe, who's speaking later this afternoon and who recently left Marriott, when I interviewed him for this report, he was still at Marriott, said, if you add up all our platform eyeballs, it's bigger than any publisher out there. Linda Boff, who keynoted this event, told me a few years ago that the amount of content that GE publishes every single day worldwide is greater than the amount of content that Time and Newsweek published weekly in their heyday. So brands are publishers on scales that are immense, on scales that even publishers can barely wrap their arms around. So you have to have goals around this, and you have to have process around this. So the goals of a global content strategy are first creating that strategy, because the strategy is what defines your goals, right? A content strategy says, number one, what your goals are, number two, how you're going to measure your progress towards achieving those goals, and number three, how you're going to actually get this stuff done. What are the processes and the procedures you're going to put into place, the infrastructure, the newsroom, the production studio, to make all of this happen. And once you have that strategy, which is, much easier said than done, just nailing the strategy can be pretty tough, you've got to evangelize it and you've got to socialize it. You've got to get other teams on board. And that involves a lot of change management. Just anecdotally, I worked with one global tech company, And they didn't evangelize and they didn't socialize. Their creative department decided that they were going to build a new DAM, a new digital asset management repository for content around the world. They didn't take anybody's requirements. They didn't tell anybody they were going to do this. Everybody in the company, particularly in marketing department, suddenly got this email one day that said, henceforth and furthermore, this is the process. Put all your content here, and this is where content will be. Well, guess what happened? Everybody sort of said, up yours. Nobody asked me about this. This doesn't meet my requirements, my department's requirements. So just no. So I was actually hired to come in because I was sort of Switzerland in all of this, and this turned into a highly political situation, just to sort of investigate where did the content go. And, I'm interviewing people, and they're like, it's in my inbox, it's on my desktop. If people start getting hit by buses or calling in sick, you've got yourself, something approaching global catastrophe. And of course, that encompasses people, process, technology, scale, which is where global comes in, making all of this stuff bigger at the same time making it more efficient, and localization. It's funny because I've been doing a lot of work on hyper-local content as well as global content, and a lot of it is really addressing the same problems. It's defining what is a locality. So if you're a big box store, is Cleveland a locality, or the Cleveland area, or different neighborhoods of the city? Same thing with global content. Is it EMEA, is it Asia Pac, or is it every individual country or even regions of different countries around the world? And then, of course, there's barriers and there's challenges to all this. There's fostering collaboration across languages, cultures, and time zones. There's the ability to share not just content, but campaigns, successes, failures, and best practices. Budget and resources. Nicole, would you do me a favor and get me a bottle of water from out there? I'm getting a little coffee. Thank you so much. Budget and resources. Very often budgets are controlled at the top and needs at the bottom aren't so well recognized. And measuring success, which is progress towards those goals. I love this quote, which is from Piers Dickinson, who's the global head of content and communications at DuPont. One size doesn't fit anyone. And global strategy requires a lot of localization. Sorry, Nicole, I found the water under the podium. So one of the things you've got to manage on a global content strategy are people, because humans are what make all of this happen. And one of the things, I've written research reports on just this subject, that is tough with content is how do you structure the people? How do you structure the business units? There's almost never a content department at companies. Yes, we have the people responsible for search, for email, all those different marketing verticals, but head of content or content division is still, while it exists, it's kind of a unicorn. So you have to drive content from both top down and bottom up. And that means that C-level leaders, hopefully from the CMO down, have to drive content's importance. Make people understand what it matters to, how it matters to the organization, and continually evangelize it. One of the best global content marketing leaders I know is Pete Blackshaw, who's head of digital at Nestle. He actually puts Nestle's C-level executives on planes and takes them to Silicon Valley just to show them new technologies, new frontiers in digital, how digital is making new inroads, so that all of Nestle's senior leadership is on board with the program. You also have to evangelize and test department-specific initiatives to drive bottom-up support, so that technology example I just gave you of this is the new DAM and everybody has to use it doesn't work. It's not human nature to accept something that's been imposed on you, particularly when it comes to work. It's something that requires dialogue. It's something that requires requirements and a sort of a give and a take. And you have to leverage cross-functional results and support so you get top-down and bottom-up support. This is almost like a circulatory system of communication and best practices. So content leaders in the organization, whoever they are, they might be the head of digital, they might be the head of marketing, of social media in some divisions, it changes radically, have to constantly go out there and beat the drum. You also have to demonstrate the WIIFM, often called the WIMI. I don't really understand how those two acronyms work, but it's the what's in it for me factor, both bottom up and top down. Go to sales and say, if we get feedback from you on what the barriers are to purchase, we can create content that addresses those barriers and make your job easier and make your sales more successful. If you give us resources to design assets that are approved on a global basis, we can share them, we can save the company money. So everybody wants their job to be easier. One of the best ways to evangelize content is to show the other person, the other team, the other department why this is going to work for them. And commit to ongoing cross-functional evangelization, communication, optimization. So there's the senior leadership issue that might be lacking. I'm not going to pretend that every CEO or every president out there is going to buy into the content program. So when it's lacking, you've got to make a case for content marketing, content strategy. And again, when I talk to senior content leaders and marketing leaders, they say metrics is the way into the C-suite door. Walk in with metrics and prove that things are working. And you have to constantly reinforce the value of your initiatives with real data. But I've got another research report about this, that real data isn't always sales. I'm going to give you a really simple example of this. I gave this example, I think, last year when I talked about content metrics here. Sony Europe found out that people were having trouble with a certain function of a TV, and they were calling the call center. Super easy fix, but every time somebody calls the call center at Sony in Europe, it costs €7, which is a little over $7. So their head of community found out about this, created a couple paragraphs of content about how to fix this issue, threw it up on the Sony website, and it got 42,000 views in the first few days it was up. 42,000 times €7 translates into nearly 350,000 euros. So that's a metric you can take to the C-suite and say, look, we saved 350,000 euros this week, and next week and the week after, this was an ongoing initiative for a few weeks. It wasn't even an initiative, it was just a quick fix. That's the kind of thing that can convince the C-suite that, hey, maybe if you give us more money for this kind of stuff, we could save you even more money. So then there's the role of the content leader, and this is a much vaunted role, but it's very elusive. It's rarely seen in the wild. I know when Joe Pulizzi wrote his first book, he was advocating for everybody should hire a chief content officer and your problems will be solved, which is true if your board is going to approve the hiring of a new C-level executive. Good luck. But there is somebody that, has to drive these processes and procedures, whether or not they have this CCO title. They have to evangelize. I'm going to say the word evangelize a lot, as you've noticed. They create and drive the strategy. They implement the processes in infrastructure, and this is global, and so the processes and infrastructure have to work on a global level. Coordination and building ownership across departments. Remember, it can't just be top down, it's also got to be bottom up. And they identify gaps and needs and talent nurturing. But also employees, you've got to identify who the content creators are and also who the sources of content are. Not necessarily the same people. There are content identifiers. So there might be somebody, for example, at Sony that identified the need for that content about how to fix the TV. It's not necessarily the person who's going to create the content, but you've got to get people talking. It's shoe leather. It's journalism 101. And again, this is evangelization that makes this stuff happen. You can operationalize it via things like internal social networks that highlight the best practices, that highlight worst practices, case studies, sharing work. Nestle, in fact, has globally adapted their Salesforce, what's the Salesforce chat function called? The internal... Yes, Chatter, thank you. They've adapted that to be a platform by which they share best content practices. There's certainly centers of excellence, digital acceleration programs, and there's also incorporating the attitude towards content in the hiring process. When you're interviewing people, you can learn about their willingness to create content, to identify stories. This should really be part of employee evaluation, especially in marketing. And if you adhere to these practices, you get what I like to call a culture of content, which is an engine that's a circulatory system throughout the organization that is a combination of people, process, inspiration, and ideas. And it flows outward across the entire organization. Certainly marketing is very, very critical to this function, but content isn't an island, and content comes from many countries, regions, localities, and departments, particularly anything public-facing. It could be research and development, it could be customers, it could be the salespeople who speak to those customers, PR, research and development, executive. So these purple functions are the ones that really are going to deliver the most fodder for content.